Jasmine Carter stood nervously at the gates of Crestwood Academy, clutching her new backpack. Her parents, standing proudly beside her, had fought hard for this moment. Crestwood, with its sprawling lawns and impressive brick buildings, was known as one of the best private schools in the state. Jasmine's acceptance here was a triumph, a step toward the bright future her parents had always dreamed of for her. As they walked towards the main building, Jasmine felt the weight of every gaze. The whispers started almost immediately, growing louder with every step. She could feel the curiosity and disdain in the eyes of the students and parents who watched her. It wasn't just her presence that caught their attention, it was the stark contrast of her dark skin against the sea of white faces. Inside the principal's office, Mr. Thompson greeted them with a strained smile. He glanced nervously at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "Welcome to Crestwood Academy, Jasmine," he said, shaking her hand quickly before turning to her parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, we're honored to have your daughter here." Jasmine's parents smiled politely, but they sensed the underlying tension. "We're confident Jasmine will excel here," Mrs. Carter said firmly, her voice steady despite the uneasy atmosphere. Jasmine was escorted to her classroom by Mrs. Abbott, a stern-looking woman with a clipboard. As they walked through the hallways, the whispers grew louder. Jasmine's steps faltered when she heard snippets of conversations. "Can you believe they let her in? This school is going downhill." Mrs. Abbott's face softened for a moment as she glanced at Jasmine. "Don't let them get to you, dear," she said quietly. "You have every right to be here." When Jasmine entered the classroom, the room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her, some with open hostility, others with mere curiosity. She took a deep breath and walked to an empty seat at the back of the room. The teacher, Mr. Hargrove, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Class, this is Jasmine Carter. She'll be joining us from today." No one said a word. Jasmine felt the weight of their silence pressing down on her. As the day wore on, she tried to focus on her lessons, but the stares and whispers never ceased. At recess, she sat alone under a tree, watching the other children play together. They avoided her like she was invisible, like she didn't belong. By the time the final bell rang, Jasmine felt exhausted and defeated. As she walked towards the school gates to meet her parents, she overheard a group of mothers talking animatedly. "We need to do something about this," one of them said. "Our children shouldn't have to share their school with her." Jasmine hurried past them, tears stinging her eyes. Her parents were waiting with hopeful smiles, but as soon as they saw her face, their expressions turned to concern. "How was your first day, sweetheart?" her father asked gently. Jasmine forced a smile. "It was okay," she lied, not wanting to worry them. But that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. She clung to the hope that things would get better, that she would find a way to prove she belonged at Crestwood Academy. Little did she know, her journey was only just beginning, and it would test her in ways she could never have imagined. It's been a week, and some parents demand explanation why Jasmine is attending the school. The PTA meeting at Crestwood Academy was packed to capacity, a rare sight in the typically serene school. Parents filled the room, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and frustration. Mr. Thompson, the principal, stood at the front, trying to maintain order, but his attempts were futile. "We can't have this," one mother, Mrs. Walker, shouted. "Our children deserve a safe and appropriate environment. This isn't what we signed up for." Another parent, Mr. Adams, stood up, his face red with indignation. "This isn't just about one child. This is about the future of Crestwood Academy. We've built a reputation here. We've invested in this school. We can't let it be ruined." Mr. Thompson held up his hands for silence. "Please, everyone, let's be reasonable. Jasmine Carter has every right to attend this school. We must be inclusive and uphold the values of equality and diversity." "Equality?" Mrs. Walker retorted. "How is it equal when our children are uncomfortable? They're too young to understand these complicated issues. It's not fair to them. Mr. Thompson's face tightened. He had anticipated some resistance, but the intensity of the backlash was overwhelming. He glanced at Mrs. Carter, who was seated quietly in the corner, her face a mask of calm determination. She had come to the meeting prepared for a fight, but the vitriol in the room was disheartening. Mr. Thompson, another parent, Mr. Harris, spoke up, his voice measured but firm. We're not saying Jasmine isn't deserving of a good education. But perhaps Crestwood isn't the right fit for her. Maybe a different school where she wouldn't stand out so much. Mrs. Carter couldn't remain silent any longer. She stood up, her voice clear and unwavering. Jasmine has a right to be here just as much as any other child. She is intelligent, hardworking, and kind. She's done nothing to deserve this treatment. The room fell silent for a moment, and Mr. Thompson saw an opportunity to restore order. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. We must remember that our actions teach our children how to treat others. If we exclude Jasmine, what message are we sending? The silence was quickly broken by another outburst. We'll withdraw our children if you don't do something. Mrs. Walker threatened, and several parents nodded in agreement. Mr. Thompson felt a cold sweat forming on his brow. The threat of losing students and the funding that came with them loomed large. He couldn't afford to ignore the financial implications, but he also couldn't justify expelling a student based on her race. He was trapped between his principles and the practical realities of running the school. I will consider your concerns, he said finally, hoping to calm the storm. But I ask for your patience and understanding as we work through this. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the damage was done. As the parents filed out, their discontent was palpable. Mrs. Carter and Mr. Thompson exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The battle was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. That evening, Mr. Thompson sat in his office, pondering the situation. He knew he had to come up with a solution that would placate the parents without compromising his integrity. It was then that an idea formed in his mind, one that he wasn't proud of but felt might be necessary. The following week, he called a staff meeting and announced his decision. We will hire a dedicated teacher to educate Jasmine separately. She will receive the same quality education but in a separate classroom to ensure the comfort of all students. The teachers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke out. The decision was made, and soon, Ms. Linda Harris, a new hire with a background in inclusive education, was introduced to Jasmine. Ms. Harris, a woman with a warm smile and a firm belief in equality, accepted the challenge with grace, though she secretly hoped for a better solution. Jasmine's first day in the separate classroom was a mix of uncertainty and resolve. Ms. Linda Harris greeted her with a warm smile, trying to create a welcoming atmosphere despite the circumstances. The classroom, tucked away in a far corner of the school, felt more like a storage room than a place for learning. Good morning, Jasmine, Ms. Harris said cheerfully. I'm looking forward to our time together. We're going to learn a lot. Jasmine nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The desk was neatly arranged, and educational posters adorned the walls, but it was clear that this was a hastily prepared space. The isolation was palpable, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel like she was being hidden away. Ms. Harris treated her with kindness and respect, promising her parents that she would provide the best education possible under the circumstances. As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine settled into a routine. Ms. Harris proved to be an exceptional teacher, patient and encouraging. She went out of her way to ensure Jasmine received a comprehensive education, covering all subjects with enthusiasm and depth. Despite the quality of the lessons, Jasmine struggled with the loneliness. During recess, she watched from the window as the other children played together. Their laughter and games were a stark contrast to her solitude. She missed the chance to make friends, to be part of a group, to feel normal. One afternoon, Jasmine overheard a conversation between two teachers in the hallway. It's a shame what they're doing to that girl, one said. Tell me about it, the other replied. She's so bright, but they're treating her like she's contagious. Jasmine's heart sank. She had hoped that maybe the teachers were on her side, but the reality of her situation felt heavier than ever. Despite Ms. Harris's best efforts, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Ms. Harris noticed Jasmine's growing despondency. "Jasmine, I know this is hard," she said gently one day after class. "But remember, you are strong and capable. You have a light within you that no one can dim. We'll get through this together." Jasmine smiled weakly. She appreciated Ms. Harris's kindness, but the isolation was taking its toll. She missed the camaraderie of a regular classroom, the simple joy of sharing a lunch table, and the ease of childhood friendships. Months passed, and Jasmine's isolation remained unchanged. Her academic performance was stellar, but the emotional toll was evident. She became quieter, more withdrawn, her once bright spirit dimming under the weight of constant segregation. Ms. Harris continued to be a beacon of support, but even she knew that Jasmine needed more than just good teaching. One day, she decided to take a small step toward breaking the barriers. "Jasmine," she said, "how would you feel about presenting your science project at the school fair?" Jasmine's eyes lit up for the first time in weeks. "Really? But, will they let me?" Ms. Harris smiled. "I'll talk to Mr. Thompson. Your work deserves to be seen by everyone." True to her word, Ms. Harris approached Mr. Thompson. "Jasmine has been working on a project about renewable energy. It's exceptional. I believe she should present it at the science fair." Mr. Thompson hesitated. "You know how the parents are, Ms. Harris. I'm not sure it's a good idea to stir things up again." "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, Jasmine has been through enough. She deserves a chance to shine, just like any other student," Ms. Harris insisted. Reluctantly, Mr. Thompson agreed. "Fine, but she must present last, after everyone else. We don't want any unnecessary disruptions." On the day of the science fair, Jasmine stood nervously at the edge of the gymnasium, watching the other students present their projects. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. When her turn finally came, she walked to the front, her heart pounding. "Hello, everyone. My project is about renewable energy and how it can help save our planet," Jasmine began. Her voice shook slightly, but as she delved into her presentation, her confidence grew. She explained complex concepts with clarity and passion, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. The room fell silent, and Jasmine feared the worst. But then, a student started clapping, followed by another, and soon the entire room erupted in applause. Even the skeptical parents were impressed by her intelligence and poise. For the first time, Jasmine felt a glimmer of acceptance. The applause was not just for her project, but for her courage and determination. She had proven that she belonged, and no one could deny her that. However, the journey was far from over. The school's administration and many parents still held deep-seated prejudices, and true integration seemed a distant dream. But Jasmine's success at the science fair planted a seed of change. The students began to see her in a new light, and a few brave ones even approached her to talk and play. In the days following the science fair, Jasmine noticed subtle changes. Some students who had previously ignored or ostracized her now approached her with curiosity and respect. During lunch, a few brave classmates invited her to sit with them, eager to hear more about her project. Jasmine felt a mix of elation and caution, unsure if these gestures were genuine or fleeting. One afternoon, as Jasmine was walking to her isolated classroom, she was stopped by Emily, a popular girl in the school. "Jasmine, can I talk to you for a minute?" Emily asked, her tone surprisingly warm. Jasmine nodded, her heart pounding. "Sure, what's up?" Emily hesitated, then said, "I saw your project at the science fair. It was amazing. I never realized how important renewable energy is. I was wondering if you could help me with my environmental science project." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. "I'd love to help," she replied, her voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. As Jasmine and Emily worked together, a tentative friendship blossomed. Emily introduced Jasmine to her friends, and soon, Jasmine found herself slowly integrating into the school's social fabric. The walls of isolation began to crumble, and for the first time, Jasmine felt a sense of belonging. However, not everyone was pleased with this newfound acceptance. Some parents and students remained steadfast in their prejudice, making it clear that they were not ready to embrace change. Jasmine's achievements reached beyond the walls of Crestwood Academy when a local news station covered her story. The segment highlighted not only her groundbreaking science project, but also the challenges she faced as the school's only black student. The feature was both inspiring and a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle against discrimination. The media coverage sparked a wave of public support for Jasmine. Letters and messages poured in from people across the state, praising her courage and resilience. The attention also brought scrutiny to Crestwood Academy's discriminatory practices, putting the school's administration under intense pressure. At a hastily called school board meeting, Mr. Thompson addressed the growing controversy. "We need to address this situation head-on," he began, his voice betraying his anxiety. "Our school's reputation is at stake, and more importantly, we must ensure that all our students feel welcome and respected." Mrs. Walker, one of the most vocal opponents of Jasmine's presence, stood up. "This media circus is exactly why we were against this from the start. We don't need this kind of attention. It's disrupting the entire school." Another parent, Mr. Paul, responded sharply. "What's disrupting the school is our unwillingness to change. Jasmine has proven herself time and again. Maybe it's time we reevaluate our own attitudes." Mrs. Walker, still a vocal opponent, stood up. "I understand the need for inclusivity, but forcing this change is causing more harm than good. My children come home upset every day." A parent named Mrs. Green responded, her voice calm but firm. "My son has learned more about empathy and justice in the past few weeks than ever before. This is an opportunity for growth, not just for Jasmine, but for all our children." The heated debate continued, but it was clear that the tide was turning. The exposure had forced many to confront their biases, and a growing number of parents and students were now advocating for genuine integration. The next day, Mr. Thompson made a pivotal announcement during the morning assembly. "Starting immediately, Jasmine Carter will join the regular classes. We will no longer tolerate segregation or discrimination in any form. Crestwood Academy will be a place where every student is valued and included." The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some applauded, while others muttered their disapproval. Jasmine, standing beside Ms. Harris, felt a surge of relief and apprehension. This was the moment she had been waiting for, but she knew the journey was far from over. As Jasmine walked into her first integrated class, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Ms. Harris had prepared her for this moment, reminding her to stay strong and true to herself. Jasmine took a deep breath and focused on the lesson, determined to prove that she belonged. Over the next few weeks, the school community slowly began to adapt. There were still moments of tension and resistance, but the seeds of change had taken root. Jasmine's classmates, influenced by her bravery and intelligence, started to see her as an equal, a friend, and a source of inspiration. The shift at Crestwood Academy was not just administrative, but deeply personal for many. Mr. Thompson, reflecting on the journey, realized that a public apology to Jasmine and her family was necessary to heal and move forward genuinely. At a special school assembly, Mr. Thompson stood before the entire student body, faculty, and many parents. "Today, I stand before you to address a grave mistake. Jasmine Carter and her family have endured unjust treatment that goes against the very principles of equality and respect we strive to uphold. Jasmine, to you and your family, I offer my deepest apologies." Jasmine, seated in the front row with her parents, felt a rush of emotions. The public acknowledgement of the wrongs she had faced was both validating and emotional. She stood up, and with the courage that had become her hallmark, she walked to the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice steady. "I accept your apology, but let's not forget that words must be followed by actions. Let this be a lesson to all of us that change is possible, but it requires continuous effort and commitment. The auditorium erupted in applause. Many students and teachers wiped away tears, moved by Jasmine's grace and strength. Emily and other friends rushed to her side, offering hugs and words of encouragement. The apology marked a turning point. It wasn't just about acknowledging the past but about committing to a future where such injustices would not be repeated. Jasmine's bravery had sparked a movement within the school, one that would ensure her legacy lived on through tangible changes. Jasmine's days at school were no longer filled with isolation, but with a sense of belonging and purpose. Jasmine's parents, watching her interact with her peers, felt a deep sense of pride and relief. Their daughter had not only found her place but had also made a significant impact on the community. What do you think about this story? Leave a comment below this video. Thanks for watching.